don't really know who the author of John was, like the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Very early on, John was attributed to one of the apostles, one of the disciples, John the son of Zebedee. But like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, these are anonymous stories of who Jesus is, and were very early on in the church assigned to different apostles, different disciples. But there, we have no evidence whatsoever at all that that this was written by John, the son of Zebedee, even though the church assigned it to him very early on in tradition. Another theory is that John, the author of the Gospel of John, is the character in the Gospel, the beloved disciple, or the disciple whom Jesus loves. And we first hear about him in chapter 13, verse 23, but he's never named in the Gospel. He's never given the name John. He's never, never especially saying that he is the author. That's just been another sort of tradition or theory. But in the end, we don't know exactly who wrote this gospel. But we can get a sense of who he is by reading the gospel, by comparing him to the other gospels and sort of seeing, okay, what was important to him. And it's really clear by comparing him to Matthew, Mark, and Luke that what you get is a gospel writer who really has a very different story to tell of Jesus. When you put Matthew, Mark, and Luke side by side, there are a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels, similar stories, similar sort of timeline for Jesus' ministry. John is really off on his own and seems to be working with different sources than the other Gospels. He clearly had different traditions, different sources, different stories that he's including that you just do not see in the other Gospels. For example, the wedding at Cana is unique to the Gospel of John, the Samaritan woman at the well, the raising of Lazarus, the foot washing. Those are all unique stories to John, and he's including them for a particular reason. Another, I think, way to think about, okay, who was John? Who was the author of the fourth gospel? Is to look at the end of chapter 20, verses 30 to 31. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not included in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe or continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and in believing, having life in his name. And so clearly this author is not interested in just telling a story about Jesus or information about Jesus. He wants something to happen to you when you hear these words or when you read this story. And what is it that he wants to have happen? Well, if you're not a believer in Jesus, you will come to believe. You will start believing in who Jesus is and have life in his name. Or if you already are believing in Jesus, you're already a believer, a follower of Jesus, these words are meant to continue so that you continue to believe, so that you might be sustained or nurtured in your faith and in your believing. So he clearly has a purpose. While we don't know, who he was, he clearly has a purpose in writing this, and that is for the believer who could be to be inspired by these words and to come to believe in Jesus. You get a lot of different imagery for Jesus. You have a Jesus here who is very much in control and interprets really his own ministry for you. So you have this sense that I think what John is doing is building off of a lot of imagery. You have the light and darkness themes. You have pictures and portraits of Jesus as shepherd that you don't see in the other Gospels. The artistry is very much present there, particularly for the ear, for listening. Nobody read back then, right? Nobody could read anything, and so they're trying to create pictures that you can have in your mind. And so I think John is just drawing on just a different sort of set of imagery for Jesus but it does have this sort of sense of creating, these images of Jesus that we don't necessarily get in the other Gospels. he has definitely has an order about it. You have the seven, the seven miracles that are outlined, and there's a definite sort of division between the first chapters 1 through 12 are Jesus signs that he does in the presence of his disciples. What's interesting about those signs is that it's typically performed. You have a miracle that's performed, and then there's a dialogue or a conversation around the sign, around the miracle, and then Jesus interprets the miracle for you. So, and it's important to note that in John, the miracles are never called miracles. They're always called signs, because the miracles in and of themselves are not, I mean, they are a big deal, but that's not the point. The point is, what do they reveal about Jesus? And so the chapters 1 through 12 is typically called the Book of Signs, and then 13 through 21, the Book of Glory, because everything slows down in chapter 13. There definitely is a way in which he's putting a lot of deliberate attention to structure, but also when you read it, when we talk about how do you read John, a lot of repetition, a lot of imagery that keeps coming back and forth over and over again in the entire gospel.